Beat my champion, and I'll marry you, the Mafia boss said with a lazy smile, and before the laughter around the marble arena had time to fade, I put my serving tray on the nearest table and raised my hand. The room fell strangely quiet. Crystal chandeliers still glowed above us, expensive whiskey still shimmered in untouched glasses, yet every pair of eyes turned toward the waitress who had just accepted a joke no one else considered real. My fingers smoothed the edge of my white apron out of habit before I stepped forward. I didn't rush. I didn't bow. I simply walked until I stood inside the circle marked by polished black stone. Someone behind me whispered that I had lost my mind. Someone else laughed harder than before. Across the room, Damian Romano rested one elbow on the carved oak chair that belonged only to the head of the Romano family. His amusement never reached his pale blue eyes. They measured people the way other men measured distance. "You understand what I said?" he asked calmly. "Perfectly." My voice surprised a few guests because it carried no tremble. "Good." He glanced toward the towering fighter beside him. "My champion has never been beaten." The giant cracked his knuckles, smiling as though this would end before anyone spilled another drink. I bent down instead. A broken champagne flute lay beside the ring where another waitress had dropped it moments earlier while trying to escape the crowd. Without a word, I picked up every glittering shard and placed them carefully on a nearby tray before anyone stepped on them. The frightened girl mouthed a silent thank you. I nodded once and returned to the center. When I looked up again, Damian was still watching me, but something in his expression had shifted. The smile remained. The certainty behind it did not. "You're worried someone else might get hurt," he observed. "Glass doesn't care who's rich," I answered. "Neither do mistakes." A faint murmur rippled through the room. Nobody spoke to Damian that way. He could have dismissed me with a single gesture. Instead, he stood. Every conversation stopped. "The Romano family keeps its word," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "A promise. Spoken before witnesses cannot be taken back." His advisors exchanged uneasy glances. They knew the old tradition as well as he did. I noticed it only because the atmosphere changed, heavier than before. Whatever this had started, it was no longer entertainment. Damian descended the 2 marble steps toward the ring but stopped several feet away, leaving the distance between us untouched. "Last chance," he said evenly. "Walk away with your dignity." I looked at the white apron tied around my waist, untied it carefully, folded it into a perfect square, and placed it beside the serving tray. It was the only uniform I owned that wasn't stained beyond repair. If I ruined it tonight, tomorrow's shift would disappear with it. I stepped barefoot onto the polished stone and lifted my eyes to meet his. "No," I said. "I'd rather keep my word." For the first time that evening, Damian Romano stopped seeing a waitress. And by choosing to stay inside that circle, I quietly closed the only safe door I had left. Damian's gaze dropped to my bare feet, then to the folded apron beside the ring. He lifted one hand before his champion could step forward. "Shoes," he said. A man near the wall moved immediately, but Damian looked at me instead. "Your choice. Fight barefoot or take a pair." I glanced at the polished stone, then at the fighter's heavy boots. "Barefoot." The champion smirked. Damian did not. "Then the floor gets cleared." His order sent half the room into motion. Glass vanished. Drinks were moved. Even the musicians stopped. He had not rescued me from my decision. He had simply removed a danger I had not agreed to face. When the last shard was gone, I stepped toward the center. The champion followed, rolling his shoulders. Damian raised his hand again. "No closed fists. No strikes to the head. She can stop at any time." Laughter broke out behind him. "Afraid she'll get hurt?" one of his advisors asked. Damien's jaw tightened. Afraid my word will become an excuse for cruelty. The room went silent. I looked at him longer than I meant to. He noticed. You still want this? He asked. I want the same rules he gets. His eyes narrowed. He outweighs you by 100 pounds. That wasn't my question. For one breath, neither of us moved. Then Damien turned to his champion. Same rules. The man's smile disappeared. That small concession changed the air between us, but it also made me responsible for what came next. I stepped closer to the fighter and held out my hand. Claire. He stared at it before taking it. Mason. His grip tightened too hard. A warning disguised as courtesy. I did not pull away. I waited until he released me, then rubbed my thumb across the old callus beneath my first finger. Damien saw it. His gaze moved to the matching marks along my knuckles, then to the way I shifted my weight when Mason circled. He said nothing, and that silence felt more dangerous than another joke. Where did you learn to stand like that? He asked. On floors that weren't cleared for me. Something flickered across his face. Not pity. Recognition, perhaps, though he buried it quickly. Mason lunged without waiting for a signal. I stepped aside, caught his wrist, and let his own momentum carry him past me. The room gasped. I released him before he hit the stone. He spun around, furious. She had no warning, Damien said. She handled it, Mason replied. Damien looked at me. He could have ended the match. He could have punished Mason. Instead, he waited. My ankle had twisted slightly during the turn. I pressed my heel down until the tremor stopped. Damien's eyes dropped to it. Say the word, he said quietly. And this ends. That offer cost him something. The witnesses were watching. His honor was tied to the challenge, but he still left the decision with me. I bent, unfolded my white apron, and tied it around my waist again. A few guests laughed, thinking I was surrendering. Damien did not. I tucked the loose ends tight so they would not catch beneath my feet, then faced Mason. I'm staying. Damien studied me for a long moment before stepping back from the ring. Then prove you belong here, he said. It was not kindness. It was something harder to earn. A chance. And when he lowered his hand to begin the match, he was no longer giving it to a waitress he had mocked. He was giving it to the only person in the room who had refused to let him choose for her. Damien's hand dropped, and Mason came at me before the room had finished inhaling. I moved half a step left. Not fast enough. His shoulder clipped mine, and pain flashed down my arm as my bare heel slid across the stone. The guests shouted for a spectacle. Mason gave them one, driving forward again with all the confidence of a man who had never needed to notice who stood in front of him. I noticed everything. The stiffness in his right knee. The way his left hand lowered whenever he turned. The silver chain at his neck, loose enough to catch beneath his glove. I could have used any of it. Instead, I caught the chain with 2 fingers and pulled it free before it tightened against his throat. Take it off, I said, placing it in his palm. Mason stared at me. Damien did too. The pause lasted only a second, but it changed the fight. Mason removed the chain and handed it to an attendant. His anger remained. His carelessness did not. He approached more slowly this time. I raised my hands, though my ankle had begun to throb beneath me. Damien's gaze dropped once, then returned to my face. He did not stop the match. He had offered me that choice already. Now he respected my answer enough to let it cost me something. Mason fainted high and swept low. I shifted my weight, trapped his wrist against my forearm, and turned just far enough to break his balance without forcing the joint. First move. He stumbled but stayed upright. The crowd stopped laughing. Mason looked at me differently now, not with kindness, but with attention. That was enough. He rushed again, using his size to close the space. I stepped inside instead of away, placed my palm against his chest, and redirected him toward the edge of the circle. His boot crossed the line. Second move. A murmur rolled through the room. Damien leaned forward, his expression stripped of amusement. Mason glanced toward him, waiting for permission to continue. Damien gave a single nod. Not to his champion. To me. The smallest acknowledgement, but it carried a weight I had not expected. My fingers tightened around the edge of my apron. For one unguarded breath, I nearly stepped back. Mason saw it. He came forward with restraint this time, no longer trying to humiliate me. That made him more dangerous. He caught my shoulder and forced me toward the floor. My injured ankle folded. I lowered with the pressure instead of fighting it, hooked my foot behind his stable leg, and used his careful grip to turn us both. Mason landed on one knee. I stayed standing. My hand remained beneath his elbow, stopping his fall before his weight could damage it. Third move. Silence filled the Romano hall. Mason looked up at me, breathing hard. I released him and offered my hand. After a long moment, he took it. Damien rose from his chair. He crossed the stone circle, picked up my folded serving tray, and placed it in my hands himself. "The match is over," he said. No mockery remained in his voice. His eyes moved from my swollen ankle to Mason's uninjured arm, then back to me. "You could have hurt him. Winning didn't require it." Damien held my gaze as though the answer had shifted something he could not shift back. Then he turned to the silent men behind him. "No one questions her place in this house tonight." It was protection, but it was also a burden. Every suspicious eye in the room sharpened. Damien faced me again and opened the door beside the ring. "You earned the right to walk away," he said. "Or you can stay long enough to show me who I just made a promise to." I tightened my grip on the tray, felt my ankle tremble beneath the white apron, and stepped through the door. The door closed behind me, and the cheering vanished as if Damien had sealed it inside the stone. A narrow hallway stretched ahead, lined with framed photographs of men who wore the same hard expression he did. Damien walked without looking back, but he shortened his stride when my injured ankle failed me. He did not offer his arm. He opened the nearest office instead and waited until I chose to enter. Inside, 3 phones rested beside an untouched dinner and a stack of folders marked with names. Damien moved the meal aside before clearing a chair for me. "Sit." That sounded like an order. His hand paused against the chair. It was badly phrased. He pulled it back. "You may sit." I did, not because he had softened the words, but because he had corrected them. He placed a small medical kit on the desk, then turned away while I wrapped my ankle myself. The privacy was deliberate. So was the silence. When I finished, he slid a blank sheet of paper toward me. Full name. Address. Emergency contact. I wrote Claire Bennett and stopped. Damien noticed the empty lines. "I cannot let a stranger leave after defeating my champion in front of every family that watches mine," he said. "And I cannot give a stranger my address because your guests laughed at me." Neither of us raised our voice. That made the distance between us feel sharper. He could have forced the answer. Instead, he picked up the paper, folded it once, and placed it beneath my serving tray. "Then I'll ask only what I need." One of his men entered carrying a tablet. He whispered something too low for me to hear. Damien's expression did not change, but his thumb pressed against the old scar across his palm. Nothing? He asked. The man shook his head. 5 years. No employment history before tonight. No lease, license renewal, medical claim, or tax record. Damien looked at me, not with triumph, but with caution. You disappeared. My fingers tightened around the white apron still tied at my waist. I kept working. Under another name? Under tables. Cash shifts. Places that didn't ask questions. The answer cost me more than I let show. Damien dismissed his man with a glance, then closed the tablet himself without copying what little it contained. Why? That is not something you earned by losing a bet. His jaw set. For a moment, the man from the portraits returned, the one accustomed to obedience. Then his eyes moved to my swollen ankle and the tray I was still holding like a shield. He opened a drawer, removed a brass key, and set it between us. There is a guest room upstairs. No guards inside the hall. The door locks from your side. You may stay until morning, or you may leave now through the service entrance. No one will follow you. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, every person in that room will try to decide whether you are a threat, an opportunity, or a weakness they can use against me. He looked toward the closed door. For the first time, I saw the weight behind his control. Not fear for himself. Responsibility for everyone whose name filled those folders. If you leave tonight, I will keep my men away from your life, he said. If you stay, I need enough truth to keep both of us from making blind choices. I looked at the brass key, then untied my apron. The safe choice was the service entrance. I folded the white cloth and placed it over the blank address line. No one touches the waitstaff because of what happened tonight, I said. No lost shifts. No punishment. No questions. Damien answered without hesitation. Agreed. I took the key. Then I'll stay until morning. His eyes lowered to my hand closing around it. That room will not feel the same after this. Neither will mine. I stepped toward the stairs, carrying the first piece of his world that could lock him out, and leaving my only uniform on his desk as proof that, by morning, I might no longer have a life to return to. The brass key felt heavier than metal when I unlocked the guest room. I did not close the door completely. Old habits left every exit half open. The folded white apron rested across the chair where I had placed it instead of hanging it in the closet. It no longer looked like a uniform. It looked like the last piece of a life I was already walking away from. A quiet knock came before dawn. Breakfast, a voice said. Not an order. Not a guard. Damien stood outside holding a tray himself. He stopped when he saw the door already open and waited instead of crossing the threshold. May I? He asked. I stepped aside. He placed the tray on the table without looking around the room. No questions. No inspection. Only a cup of coffee, fresh bread, and a small envelope. Your pay, he said. For last night's shift. I looked at the envelope but did not touch it. I didn't finish serving. You finished your job. He slid the envelope closer. You protected one of my employees before you protected yourself. My hand remained still. You noticed that. Everyone noticed the match. His eyes settled briefly on the untouched apron. I noticed something else. Silence stretched. Between us. It was not uncomfortable anymore. Just careful. A phone vibrated in his pocket. He read one message, locked the screen, and slipped it away. The calm in his face never broke, but the coffee in his hand cooled untouched. Bad news? I asked. Routine. He answered too quickly. Before I could respond, another knock interrupted us. An older housekeeper entered with fresh towels, her hands trembling as she reached for the tray. One plate slipped. I caught it before it struck the floor. She froze, whispering an apology to Damien before turning pale. "It was my fault," I said quietly. "I moved too fast." The woman looked at me in confusion. Damien looked at both of us. Then he picked up the plate himself and placed it back on the tray. "No one apologizes for accidents in this house," he said. "Only for choices." The housekeeper blinked, nodded, and left with steady hands. The room became silent again. I finally understood why no one inside the Romano estate met his eyes for long. They were not afraid of sudden anger. They were afraid of disappointing a man who carried everyone else's mistakes as his own responsibility. Every careful pause, every corrected sentence, every choice he had given me instead of taking from me, none of it had been distance. It had been discipline. He had treated me the same way he treated the people whose livelihoods depended on him. The realization settled more heavily than the brass key in my pocket. Another vibration broke the silence. Damien read the message this time without hiding the screen. A photograph flashed for less than a second. It was the restaurant where I worked. Two suited men stood outside the entrance asking questions. He turned the phone over before I could see more. "My promise is already costing someone," he said. He reached for the envelope of wages, then stopped halfway. The old Damien, the man everyone expected, would have solved the problem without asking. Instead, he looked directly at me. "If I send my people, they'll protect your co-workers and expose them to my world. If I do nothing, they remain safe from me but not from those looking for you. I won't make that choice for you." My fingers tightened around the brass key. The easy path was to walk out the service entrance and disappear again. The harder path would tie innocent people to the consequences of my decision forever. I picked up the white apron, folded it one last time, and laid it beside the untouched envelope. "Protect them," I said. "If someone has to lose the life they knew because of last night, let it be me." Damien closed his eyes for the briefest moment before giving a single nod. Neither of us spoke again. We no longer looked at each other as a mafia boss and a waitress. We looked at each other as two people who had just chosen responsibility over the only safe lives they still had. "Protect them," Damien said into the phone, and the cost of my choice began before he lowered it. Within minutes, every waitress from the restaurant had been sent home with full pay. 2 drivers waited outside their apartments. The dining room closed under the excuse of a plumbing failure. It was efficient. It was also impossible to hide. "They'll know someone important intervened," I said. Damien placed the phone on the desk. "They already knew enough to ask for you. Now they'll know where to look." His eyes held mine. He did not deny it. Protecting them had removed one danger and created another. The men outside the restaurant would no longer reach my co-workers, but they would understand that I was inside Damien Romano's protection. My past had just become part of his family's war. Mason entered without his usual confidence and set a small evidence bag on the table. Inside lay a silver chain. The same one I had removed before our match. The clasp had been replaced with a black metal tag stamped with a narrow crown. My hand stopped beside the white apron. Damien noticed the change in my breathing before Mason noticed the mark. "You recognize it," he said. I folded the apron once, though its edges were already straight. "They use it to mark people who belong to them." "Did you?" Mason asked. Damien's gaze cut toward him, not threatening, only final. "She decides what she answers." The restraint hurt more than pressure would have. He was giving me the one thing those men had never allowed me to keep. Choice. I picked up the bag. "I trained for them." The words left the room colder. They found talented fighters young. Paid for coaches. Medical care. Travel. I set the chain down carefully. Then they decided every victory belonged to them. Damien looked at the calluses on my hands, the ankle I had hidden, the empty years on his tablet. The scattered pieces finally formed something he could see without forcing me to name all of it. "You didn't disappear because you lost," he said. "You disappeared because winning made you valuable to the wrong people." I could not answer. My fingers closed around the brass key in my pocket until its teeth marked my palm. Damien turned away from the window. "I can move everyone connected to the restaurant tonight." "No, Claire, they have families. Jobs. Lives that are not yours to relocate." His jaw tightened because my refusal protected the same people he wanted to protect. We were standing on opposite sides of the same promise. "Then give me another option," he said. I looked at the silver crown. "Let them believe I'm leaving your protection." Mason shook his head. "That gives them access. It gives us control over where." Damien's face went still. He could use his men, his city, every locked door he owned. None of it could make this choice painless. "You are asking me to use you as bait. I'm asking you not to turn innocent people into prisoners because of me." Silence held between us. Then Damien opened his hand. "The key." I hesitated before placing the brass key in his palm. He closed his fingers around it, and for one terrible second I thought he had chosen control. Instead, he set it on the desk beside my apron. "Your door remains yours," he said. "But from this moment forward, I share the risk openly. No secrets. No orders disguised as protection." The promise was small. It cost him the advantage of acting alone. I nodded. It cost me the safety of hiding everything. Mason's phone lit up before either of us could speak again. He read the message and looked at Damien. "The restaurant staff are safe. But the men left something behind." He turned the screen toward us. A photograph showed my folded apron, pinned to the restaurant door beneath the black crown. Damien looked from the image to the apron on his desk. They had not come to retrieve me. They had come to remind me that every life I touched could be made part of the price. I reached for the silver chain. Damien covered it with his hand, not taking it from me, only stopping me long enough to meet my eyes. "Choose carefully," he said. I slid my hand beneath his and took it anyway. I already did. By deciding to face them on my terms, I gave up the last protection anonymity had ever offered, and Damien, by letting me choose, accepted that keeping my trust might cost him the only thing he had always relied on, control. Damien released the silver chain and stepped away from the table. "Tell me where they expect you." I looked at the black crown stamped into the metal. "The old freight gym by the river." Mason reached for his phone. Damien stopped him with one glance. "No convoy. No visible weapons. They want proof Claire has left my protection." "Then give them proof," I said. Damien's eyes returned to mine. "That means I cannot follow. It means you have to trust me." The words landed harder than any demand. He had built his life around arriving first, controlling every door, carrying every consequence before anyone else could touch it. Now the only way to protect the restaurant staff was to let me walk into danger without turning my choice into his command. He opened the desk drawer and removed the brass key to the guest room. "Keep this." I shook my head. "If I carry it, they'll know I plan to return." His fingers closed around the key. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he placed it beside my folded white apron. "The room stays yours. Even if I don't come back." His jaw tightened. "Especially then." That small kindness made leaving harder. I picked up the apron and tied it around my waist. Damien stared at the white cloth as though it had become something he could lose. "You don't have to wear that." They think it proves I'm still ashamed of where I came from. I smoothed the fabric over my hands. Let them be wrong. At the service entrance, Mason waited with the car keys. Damien took them from him and held them out to me. You drive. You said you wouldn't follow. I won't. His hand remained open. But I won't decide your route either. I accepted the keys. Our fingers almost touched, then both of us stopped. The distance between them felt larger than the city. If anything changes, he said, you leave. If anything changes, they move against the staff. Claire. That is the choice. He looked past me toward the sleeping house, toward every person his power had taught him to protect. Then he nodded once. He hated my decision. He respected it anyway. The freight gym was empty except for one man standing beneath the dead scoreboard. He wore no weapon where I could see it. He did not need one. A phone rested on a folding chair, its screen showing live images of the restaurant employees inside their homes. Safe. Watched. You brought Romano's protection with you, he said. No, I placed the car keys on the floor and kicked them across the concrete. I brought his trust. The man smiled. Then we know where to cut. He held out a document. My old name was printed at the bottom beneath a contract I had never been allowed to refuse. If I signed again, the surveillance would end. If I refused, every person Damien had protected would remain a target. I took the pen. Behind me, the gym door opened once. Damien stood in the shadow, alone, unarmed, far enough away to keep his promise and close enough to break it. The man beside me smiled wider. He followed. Damien's face went still. I came to return something. He placed the brass key on the floor between us and stepped back outside. He had not come to take control. He had come to leave me away home. The choice became unbearable because it was still mine. I signed the contract. The screens went dark. The man took the paper and removed the silver chain from my hand. You belong to us again. I looked toward the doorway, but Damien had already disappeared. He had protected my freedom by letting me sacrifice it, and I had protected his people by becoming the one thing he could no longer reach without betraying the man he had chosen to become. The man fastened the silver chain around my neck, but I did not lower my eyes. You signed, he said. That means you obey. I looked toward the empty doorway where Damien had left the brass key. No, I said. It means your cameras leave innocent people alone. His smile faded. The contract had worked only because fear had once made me disappear. This time, I had chosen the cost before they could name it for me. He reached for my arm. I stepped aside, turned his wrist, and released him before pain became punishment. The same restraint I had shown Mason. The same choice that had made Damien look at me differently. Two men moved from the shadows. I could have run, but the screens behind them came alive again, showing the restaurant staff waiting inside their homes. Safe for now. I stayed between the men and the control table. The gym door opened. Damien entered alone, carrying my folded white apron in one hand and the brass key in the other. No guards followed him. No weapon appeared beneath his coat. You were told to leave, the man said. Damien placed the apron and key on the concrete. She was. His eyes met mine. I wasn't. The man laughed. You came to take her back. Damien's face remained still. Claire is not mine to take. The words changed everything the promise had meant from the moment he made it. He had once offered marriage as ownership disguised as a joke. Now he stood inside the only room where his power could have forced an ending and refused to use it. The door is open, he told me. You can leave, stay, or finish this. I'll honor whichever choice is yours. The silver chain pressed cold against my throat. I looked at the apron on the floor, the uniform I had once worn because being unseen felt safer. Damien had carried it here not to remind me who I had been, but to return the part of myself I had never needed to be ashamed of. I pulled the chain free and laid it beside the apron. I'm finishing it. Damien removed his coat. Then you're not finishing it alone. The men advanced. He did not step in front of me. He stepped beside me. When one rushed him, Damien redirected the blow and left the opening for me. When another tried to reach the control table, I blocked his path. And trusted Damien to hold mine. We moved without orders, each choosing what the other could not protect alone. Mason and the restaurant workers appeared on the monitors, no longer sitting quietly. One by one, they covered the cameras, cut the feeds, and walked out of sight. The organization's strongest weapon had never been force. It had been obedience. The moment we stopped giving it to them, their control began to collapse. The man with the contract backed toward the table. I reached it first, tore my signed page in half, and handed one piece to Damien. He did not burn it or keep it. He placed it in my palm. Your choice, he said again. I let both pieces fall. The fight ended without triumph. The gym remained scarred, my old life remained gone, and the years they had taken did not return. Damien picked up the brass key but left the apron where it lay until I chose to lift it myself. Then he opened the door and stepped aside. For the first time, neither of us owed the other rescue, protection, or obedience. We had only the harder question left, whether two people who had finally learned to stand as equals would still choose to walk through the same door. Damien held the gym door open, but he did not ask me to follow him through it. He waited on the other side while I lifted the white apron from the concrete and folded it over my arm. The silver chain stayed where it had fallen. So did the torn contract. Some things did not need to be carried forward to remain part of us. Outside, dawn had begun to soften the river into gray light. Damien stood beside the car with the brass key resting in his open palm. The room is still yours, he said. I looked at the key, then at him. I don't need somewhere to hide. His hand lowered, but he did not close it. Then tell me what you need. It was a question the man from the marble ring could never have asked. He would have decided, arranged, protected, and called it mercy. Now he waited while silence made him vulnerable. A choice that isn't payment for winning, I said. He nodded once. No defense. No reminder of the promise he had made before his family. We returned to the Romano estate without an escort. The hall had been cleared of its spectators, but Mason stood inside the black stone circle, showing the frightened waitress from that night how to plant her feet without locking her knees. When she lost her balance, he caught her elbow and released it immediately. Again, he asked. She chose to stay. Damien watched the exchange, then ordered the raised chair at the end of the room removed. Not moved. Removed. By noon, the old honor rule had been rewritten in front of the same family witnesses. No promise spoken by a Romano could bind another person without their consent. Damien surrendered the tradition that had protected his pride because it had once threatened my freedom. The room did not applaud. Change rarely sounded like victory while it was happening. Weeks passed. My ankle healed, but some doors remained difficult to close. I kept the guest room key, though I stopped sleeping with a chair beneath the handle. Damien never entered without knocking. I returned to the restaurant once, not for my old shift, but to hand the frightened waitress her final paycheck and an offer to train at the estate gym if she chose. Will I have to fight? She asked. Only for the right to decide for yourself, I said. Her smile carried something forward that neither Damien nor I could own. On the evening the chandeliers were lit again, I found him standing alone inside the marble circle where he had once mocked me. My white apron rested over one arm. There were no guests, no champion, no witnesses except the people we had become. Damien lowered himself onto one knee, but he held out nothing. No ring. No contract. No key. I made marriage sound like a prize, he said. You were never something to win. He rose before I answered, giving me the same distance he had learned to protect. The promise is released. You owe me nothing. I unfolded the apron and tied it around my waist, not as a uniform, not as camouflage, but as the part of myself I refused to abandon. Then I stepped into the circle by choice. Damien did not reach for me. He waited. Ask me again, I said. His breath caught. Claire Bennett, will you marry me? The first time, the room had laughed. This time, there was only silence, wide and gentle enough to hold an honest answer. I placed the brass key in his palm and closed his fingers around it. Yes, I said. Because I choose you. Above us, the chandeliers burned softly over an empty ring.